Coffee. I mean, there are a few things better than a great cup of coffee. And if you're anything like me, then you probably can't even function without it.
Oh, I can't stop drinking the coffee. I stopped drinking the coffee. I stopped doing the standing and walking and the words putting into sentence doing.
And as it turns out, there are quite a few people like me in that regard. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how you can make some DIY gifts for the coffee lovers in your life. Check it out. Alright guys, the first gift idea I've got for you is a handmade wooden coffee scoop. Now I made this scoop out of a block of walnut that I had left over, but technically you could use whatever wood you like. You could also create your own design and shape, but I just simply chose to use a coffee scoop that I already had to trace the design to get started. Then it was over to the drill press to start removing some material. For that, I used a 1 3/4 inch Forstner bit on my drill press to create a recessed hole that was about 1.5 inches deep. Once I had my hole drilled out, I took my piece over to the bandsaw to start cutting out my rough shape. To get the shape and curve of the coffee scoop that I was going for, I simply freehanded a design and cut it close but not all the way to the line. I will use my sander to get the scoop to its final shape. After using the sander to get the final shape of my scoop, I finished it off with lots of hand sanding. To help protect this coffee scoop, I added a few coats of food-safe mineral oil and beeswax. There you have it guys, this thing is done and looking mighty fine. If you're looking for a quick and easy gift for a coffee lover, this one did not take very long at all, and I think it turned out awesome. Alright, now for gift idea number 2. For this gift, I wanted to try and cast some coffee beans in epoxy resin and create something sort of similar to a coaster. To do this, I poured the epoxy in several different layers. For the first layer, I used some high-performance epoxy from Total Boat mixed with a couple of colored pigments from Black Diamond to create my base layer. Once my base layer had hardened up enough, I added some coffee beans on top inside of my silicone molds. I then mixed up a batch of thick-set casting epoxy from Total Boat without any pigment this time. And I coated the beans enough so that when they dried, the coffee beans wouldn't float up to the surface. If you're wondering how I know that they do that, well, let's just say that I had to learn the hard way, and I now have about 6 more of these coasters than I originally intended. But hey, this was all a big experiment, so now I know. Since thick-set epoxy takes longer to cure, I let this layer set up for about 2 days. My third and final pour for this project was after a couple of days and the beans were good and set inside my last epoxy pour. For this final pour, I used thick-set epoxy again and poured it so that it had a nice coating over everything. I made sure to pop any air bubbles as it set up, and I let it cure for a couple of days. Now, once these are dry, you could choose to round these coasters over or give them some sort of edge profile, but to be honest, I decided to just leave them as is. I think these coasters turned out pretty cool, even though I had to learn some lessons from my experiment and maybe waste a bit more epoxy than I had planned. I think this can make a really unique gift for someone, and who doesn't love unique gifts? Okay, let's move on to gift idea number 3. Alright guys, now this thing I'm pretty proud of. I love the way it turned out. To get started on this pour over coffee stand, I milled up some cherry, sycamore, and walnut lumber. Once I had all of my pieces milled, I glued and clamped my pieces together and left them in the clamps for about 24 hours. The next day, I took my glued up pieces out of clamps and ran it through the planer a couple of times to get it nice and cleaned up. From there, I trimmed it to size on my miter saw and started taking measurements for the mitered cuts that I wanted to make. So my plan was to use mitered joints rather than butt joints for this pour over coffee stand. Miter joints can be a little bit more tricky in terms of cutting everything correctly though. I decided to make my mitered cuts on my miter saw with the blade beveled, but if I'm being honest, this felt a little bit sketchy in the moment. So I can't really say that I would recommend to make these cuts in that way. In hindsight, I should have used my table saw with the sled, but that's just something that I hadn't gotten around to making yet. And to be frank, my little table saw has its limitations, and I'd say making angle cuts is one of them. It has the functionality to do it, but I never find the cuts to be that accurate. All in all though, it served me pretty well. Before gluing my pieces together for my stand, there were a few things that I needed to do first. I wanted to route out a groove for a cork coaster on the bottom, as well as cut a hole in the top for the pour over mug. To route out the hole for the bottom, I attached a template with some CA glue and used an edge bushing on my router to follow along that template. I used the same technique in my last video where I made a sofa arm table, so if you want to check that video out where I provide a little more info on this technique, then I'll leave a link to that in the description box below. To cut the hole for the top, I used a hole saw that was just slightly larger than the size of the bottom of the pour over mug. With my 3 pieces prepped now, it was time to get them glued up. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this glue up was a little bit tricky, and I don't have the best footage to indicate just how tricky that was. Sorry about that. The tough part about miter joints is finding a way to clamp them together. I should have used some mitered clamping caws here, but that was my bad. I wanted to make sure that everything was square. That was my top priority, even if that meant my miters might show a bit of a gap. I could always fill that in later with some wood filler. Once that wood filler had dried, I sanded my piece smooth and then used my router to chamfer over all of the edges. To finish this stand off, I applied a couple coats of General Finishes oil-based top coat, which really made that wood grain pop. I applied around 4 coats of this finish to make sure it was able to stand up to the potential exposure to moisture and heat. Lastly, I added a couple of rubber feet to the bottom of the stand and it was completely finished. How cool did this thing turn out? I had an idea in my head of what I wanted it to look like, and it's always so cool to see that come to life. As far as coffee makers go, this is a pretty beautiful one. It's totally functional, but also can be used as a decoration piece. Okay, 3 gifts down, it's time for
another one.
Now, if you're going to make a beautiful pour-over coffee stand, then you're gonna need some sort of filters. And you could hide those ugly filters in the cabinet, but why not give them a much cooler home? So for this gift, I'm going to make a walnut holder for some paper filters. And since you've seen me mill lumber a lot already in this video, I'll spare you the boring details. For the design of my piece, I didn't really have a plan. I just drew some lines that looked cool. Let's just call it abstract art. And the nice thing about abstract art is it doesn't have to make any sense. Once I had my shape drawn up, I took it over to the bandsaw and started cutting it out. In order for a filter to fit inside of this piece, I'm going to have to remove some material from the middle. Now, maybe there are different ways to do this, but I decided what was easiest was to cut it into 3 separate pieces and then cut more off of my middle piece. So that's what I did. Prior to gluing up my 3 pieces together, I sanded each piece to remove some of the bandsaw blade marks. For the glue up, I applied some painter's tape to the middle section to prevent getting glue there, since I know that would be a major pain in the behind to sand once it was glued up. Then I applied glue to my pieces and clamped everything together. Once the glue was dry, I took my piece over to the sander and started sanding it to its final shape, which was whatever I wanted to be, because remember, it's abstract. I applied a couple coats of mineral oil and beeswax to this holder and it was finished. Another cool, unique gift idea to add to the list. Functional and beautiful. It's hard to beat that. Alright guys, as you can see, I have all of these amazing gifts finished up now, but I have one little problem still. See, these are all going to be a gift for my sister-in-law, and rather than have to wrap each of these pieces up individually, I want to find something that I can sort of group it all together in. And now I could go out and buy a gift bag or a gift basket or something of that sort, but you know, that's not really my style. My style is making handmade gifts, as you can see here. So I've got one more trick up my sleeve. I'm gonna take some wooden scraps that I have lying around my shop, and I'm gonna make a box that I can put all of this in. For this box, I used some rough pine offcuts that I had. I used my same process as before to mill the lumber down for my box. Because I needed my box to be a bit taller than the boards that I had, I needed to glue up 2 boards together to get the dimension I was after. my glued up boards dried, I cut them to their final dimension and cleaned up any remaining glue with my sander. To make my box, I planned on having an inset panel on both the top and the bottom of my box. To make this happen, I needed to route out a 1/4 inch groove on both sides of my panel. So I marked each piece and ran it through my router table. With all my pieces prepped, all that was left was to glue up all of the parts for my box. Once my glued up box was dry, I set my table saw so that it would cut about 2 inches down from the top, and I ran each side through. This would give me the top for my box. My last few steps were chamfering my edges and sanding it smooth. In order for this box to operate like it should, I installed some flush mount hinges. And to make it a little easier to carry, I added a couple of handles as well. I'm so glad I decided to make this box, or treasure chest as my husband likes to call it, to put everything in. Not only does it serve the purpose of being able to hold all of these gifts, but it can also be used as a keepsake box for whatever in the future, so it's a win-win. Alright guys, there you have it. 4 gift ideas for the coffee lover in your life. And hey, maybe the coffee lover in your life is you. And if that's the case, then treat yourself a little. Build yourself one of these 4 things. Well, that's gonna do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it inspired you to build something amazing. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you'd like to help support my channel and help it grow, then feel free to hit those like and subscribe buttons. I would really appreciate it, and it would probably make my day. So go ahead, make my day, won't you? I'll see you guys again soon for my next video. Bye.